Hello Proponomics people, and welcome to my video from the 26th of March 2024, Tuesday. And today I wanted to talk a little bit about a couple of the metrics that have been released this week. So one of them is the CBI distributive trades. That's a barometer. That's a survey that the CBI put out. It's about retail sales in general. A surprising print yesterday when it came out, and the print was +2. The previous print was -7, and actually the forecasts were that it was going to get worse, not better. So a surprising +2, which is the first positive print since April 2023. And the sort of prints we have been seeing in between, there was a humongous -50 in January, which was the lowest number for a long time. And we've had a lot of negative numbers in the interim. We improved massively to -7 in February, but we had a few prints of like -30s and -40s last year, so recessionary times it wasn't looking good. +2 is great news, and as I say, a bit of a surprise. So that's positive, and there's some pretty positive commentary around that. Decline for 10 months, bit of a rebound. Easter being blamed for being early in a way of explaining those figures, which does make sense because obviously it dropping into March rather than April means it would improve year on year if last year it dropped into April rather than March. And last year April was a positive month, as I said, so perhaps there's something in the Easter side of things. The anticipation is there'll be another decline in April, though. This is not like a we've turned the corner sort of thing. But if you start to put 2 and 2 together here, you'll remember that last week I talked about how the PMIs were out, the flash PMIs. So remember the PMIs, the Purchasing Managers Indices. So it's a survey from the purchasing managers in companies, in construction, in manufacturing, in industrial, and most importantly in services companies, right? These are the people who buy the stuff. They're the people who know whether things are expanding or contracting. That's the logic. It's also very much real time. So the March flash figure came out last week, and you'll notice we're still in March. So that's pretty great. We don't get too many real time stats. One of them, my big bugbears with all the data that we have to look at, is that sometimes it's 3, 4, 5, 6, 12, 18 months old with some of the government data stuff. And 18 months old data when you've had a relatively fast-paced changing environment is no good. In fact, it's difficult to say that it's ever going to be any good for making any decisions. It's only really good for pontificating about and sharing articles on LinkedIn about, if we're honest with ourselves, when it's 18 months old. We need real-time information. How do we get real-time information in the property game? Ultimately, we talk to agents, we see what's going on, we talk to auction houses in the way that we're dealing in our day-to-day business, and we do look at the data that comes out that is much quicker, like a Nationwide, which publishes its index on the first day of the following month, apart from anything else. EIG Auction News also tends to be fairly good. Essential Information Group, the absolute Bible for all auctions. If you're interested in auction and you don't have a look at EIG already, have a look. It's not cheap for a subscription, but highly recommended if you like data on stuff like that. So putting together the flash manufacturing PMI print we had last week, anyway, which was 49.9, which was a surprise, so very, very nearly 50. A massive uplift from the 47.8 it was the month before. That's not the final print for March, because March isn't over yet, but that's the flash figure, and that vast improvement. Possibly there might be a bit of momentum beyond that as we build up to Easter, and we maybe see up to go over 50, a 50 print for Easter, which would be great news because manufacturing's had a tough time of it. But again, at a high level, how do I interpret that? Well, essentially, there was a huge boom in manufacturing when the pandemic came. Not just because of some companies switching to manufacturing PPE in the UK. Obviously, a lot was imported, and there's been all sorts of political fuss over quality and people who hadn't imported stuff before, and all sorts of, mates down the pub landlord getting a PPE contract, and all sorts of stuff that people are rightly very, very annoyed about. And some of those contract disputes for kit that was delivered that wasn't workable, that wasn't serviceable, those are still going on. As you'll know, there's a few high profile ones going on if you've been following that in the news. So that was a big bonus. And also everybody was buying goods because they couldn't buy lots of services. They couldn't buy hospitality services. They couldn't buy travel services. They couldn't buy leisure services. So much was closed down in the economy. So all that money went into goods. There was this huge growth. You'll remember maybe there was things flying around like 5 years of online sales growth in Amazon and the likes within 3 months. That's how much impact the pandemic had. Now, of course, what goes up must come down in those situations. And as the pandemic eased, people had bought more than they needed. They looked out there at that hot tub they weren't using. They looked at that Peloton bike they weren't getting on and all the rest of it. They decided to start selling it on eBay. Second-hand market took off because apart from anything else, cost of living squeeze came in and people couldn't afford to buy new stuff. And also, people couldn't necessarily afford to buy stuff on credit anymore either because the price of credit had been going up. So all of this has impacted goods over the past couple of years. So real purple patch really after obviously an area of concern during COVID, but many didn't furlough their staff in manufacturing. They instead produced lots and lots, sold lots and lots. That was 2020. That was the first half of 2021 tapering off. And then the downhill slide of that slope came, and we've been battered really by that. And retail figures generally have just about remained positive, but they're not adjusted for inflation. So they've lost to inflation, and retail, apart from anything else, will suffer significantly from wage rises. And there's a massive wage rise coming in just a few days' time. So it's going to put 11.5% plus on their wage bills for retail stores, for retail outfits that generally speaking employ lots and lots of people who are being paid at the minimum wage level. Businesses that have got a lot of under 23-year-olds, it's going to be even more because the rise in the minimum wage under 23 is more. It's more at 12.5%. Plus the costs associated with that if they're working on anything like anywhere near a full-time basis or any more than about 24 hours a week, the cost base increase is going to be more like 15%. So it's a huge cost increase for them to bear. But they've had this big bump. It's on the way back down. That's the moral of the story, really. But it's always good to see a positive print in these numbers. Always a good economic sign. Again, one more sign if we needed it that this recession that we supposedly had in the second half of last year, this technical recession, if we can even call it that, has actually really gone away now. And now we've only got 5 days left in March. I think we're at 99.99% at this stage, approaching 100 very rapidly as long as nothing happens over Easter weekend, realistically. So that's where we were. And yesterday, the only other thing that was worthy of comment in this video is the Bank of England's Catherine Mann. So those who follow the channel regularly will know I take more than a passing interest in all of the members of the Monetary Policy Committee, what their views are, where they're coming from, where they hail from, what their background is, what their natural bent is towards putting rates up or putting rates down as a general rule. And Catherine Mann is pretty much rated as the hawkiest of the hawks. She votes up almost all of the time. There was a speech yesterday which was behind closed doors that we haven't seen the minutes of. We haven't seen the transcript of on the Bank of England website as yet, but Reuters reported that Mann had basically said it was a real toss-up for her whether to vote up or whether to vote sideways. And she went with sideways, but it's very much in the balance. Now that doesn't sound like someone who in 6 weeks' time, after we've had one more set of data being released in terms of growth, in terms of inflation, in terms of all the other things that the bank need to take into account, we've got one set of data before that meeting. It's safe to say Catherine Mann is not going to be voting down at that meeting unless we have some really significant surprises in some of those prints that are incoming. And even if we did, I think she'll still be minded to hold. Now, she's not the best bellwether, right? And this is really going to depend on what I'm calling them the core do. Remember, 5 members of the committee work for the bank, including the governor, the 3 deputy governors and the chief economist. They have tended very much to cluster their votes together, especially since Hugh Pill has been the chief economist. That's the groupthink accusation that is valid. There's a lot of positive press is around the fact that the Bank of England members sometimes disagree, but it does tend to be the external members that stick their necks out. It also does tend to be the external members who are some of the most well-qualified economists in the world. That doesn't mean they're going to get it right necessarily, because they didn't get it right around transitory inflation. And they were still maintaining, and they're now still maintaining that's the way it's been, and there isn't any kind of secular element to the inflation that's come on the back of the pandemic, which again I disagree with, because when you look at economic history, there is some secular inflation in there. But that's a little roundup of what happened yesterday in the things that move the needle in the markets, and the sort of things gives you a flavour of the sort of things I keep my eyes on regularly. Thank you.